How does an empire begin? Pastcast, Episode 1. Why did Rome fall? Subsection. When an empire is born, its birth is never silent, nor painless. An empire doesn't simply emerge. It is built, won, taken, but never born by accident. So it was with Rome. Born of blood, stone, myth, and mud. It began with the first blow of a shovel, struck at the heart of a legend by the Tiber River. A legend nursed by wolves. Rome's story begins with a myth. Romulus and Remus, two brothers, saved by the milk of a she-wolf, turned against each other, and in the end, one killed the other and founded a city. Was it a fairy tale? Maybe. But every empire must first believe a myth, because no people will march behind a flag without first marching behind a sacred story. The birth of the Republic, a balance of power and people. Rome began as a city, then it became a state in 509 BCE when its last king, Tarquinius Superbus, was overthrown by the people. A new age began, the Roman Republic. Now, there were representatives of the people, senators, consuls, plebeians, patricians. But it was not a democracy. It was a division of power, and every division brings struggle. The pendulum between the people and the elite would keep the empire alive for centuries, but also leave the first cracks within its foundation. Rome did not truly grow through politics. It grew through the sword. The Punic Wars against Carthage opened the gates of the Mediterranean to Rome, by land and by sea. Hannibal may have crossed the Alps with elephants, but Rome buried those elephants in the pages of history, with patience and discipline. Once Rome won a war, it did not stop. It swallowed every enemy state, dragged every resisting people behind it. Rome's expansion wasn't just a matter of maps. It was a transformation of the mind. Peoples fought Rome, then became Rome. That's why Rome wasn't just a land. It became an identity. A soul built from stone. Rome built roads, but those roads didn't only carry legions. They carried knowledge, culture, commerce, and above all, they carried Rome. A city became a system became a way of life. Roman philosophy, law, architecture, aqueducts, amphitheaters. It became not just a state, but a model of civilization. And that model replicated itself not only in Italy, but in Gaul, Hispania, Egypt, Anatolia. Rome became not a place, but a mindset. And finally, empire. After all the wars, treaties, alliances, and betrayals, one man emerged, Gaius Julius Caesar. He struck the blow that shattered the Republic. But the man who became emperor came after him, his heir Octavian, Augustus. Economic collapse and internal decay. Rome's fall from within. An empire is rarely destroyed by an outside blow. True collapse always begins from within. And the first structure to rot is always the economy. Rome's fall did not begin with war, but with silent marketplaces, abandoned farms, and coins that lost their meaning. To understand this, we must not look to the gladiators of Rome's golden age, but to the quiet days. When bakeries closed, vineyards fell silent, and blacksmiths no longer worked the forge. A world devalued in the shadow of gold. In its early days, Roman coins were nearly pure gold. Each piece of currency held weight, not just in trade, but as a symbol of Rome's stability. But over time, the wars multiplied, the army swelled, palaces became more lavish, feasts more extravagant, and the cost could no longer be paid through taxes alone. So they searched for a solution: counterfeit money. The gold content in the coins was reduced. More money was minted with less value, and with that, the empire destroyed its own credibility with its own hands. One day, the Roman people realized their coins could no longer buy even a single sack of grain. The people crushed by taxes. As the empire expanded, so did the burden on its people. Farmers no longer fought only the land. They fought taxation. While wealthy senators claimed vast estates, small farmers drowned in debt. Tax collectors showed no mercy. Some peasants, unable to pay, were forced to offer their own children as collateral. Some fled their land. Others became slaves to what they once owned. The gap between rich and poor widened. The Republic's ideals, once carved into stone as a promise of balance, remained only on statues, not in society. A collapsing army, loyalty for hire. The Roman army was once the very definition of discipline. But as the empire grew, it faced a shortage of soldiers. Citizens no longer wanted to enlist. Why? Because the pay was irregular, the service long, and when they returned, there was nothing. Their land was gone, families scattered, tax debts piled high. This void was filled by mercenaries. But these soldiers did not fight for Rome. They fought for gold. Rome no longer trusted its own people, but rented loyalty instead. And rented loyalty can vanish with the wind. A bloated bureaucracy, justice lost. As the empire grew, so did the ruling class. But this growth did not bring efficiency, only dead weight. Corruption spread. Authority came not from merit, but from bloodline. The Senate no longer represented the people, but only its own internal power games. Laws were written not for citizens, but for elites. Justice was no longer found in Rome's streets, but whispered behind palace doors. Rome forgot itself. The economic collapse was not just the end of trade, it infected the soul of Rome. Sad. No one spoke of Rome as us anymore. Everyone was in it for themselves. The rich grew richer, the poor sank deeper. A great wall of alienation grew, separating soldier from citizen, citizen from state. Thoughtful, Rome became a stranger to itself, a society where no one trusted one another, where no one shared a dream, can only look like an empire from the outside. And that image had begun to crack. The collapse came quietly. Rome did not fall in a single morning. Its walls didn't crumble. Its temples didn't explode. But the marketplace was silent. The soldiers demoralized. The youth, hopeless. Farmers had lost their land. Merchants had lost their buyers. And the people had lost their future. An empire can take a hit from outside. Sad. But when hope is gone from within, it's only a matter of time. And for Rome, that time had already begun. Did the barbarians destroy Rome, or did Rome open the gates? When a wall falls, its stones are not always pushed from the outside. Sometimes the mortar within simply crumbles with time. Rome's collapse was just like that. The shadows Rome once called barbarians were drawing near. But the real danger was this. The hand holding the gate had already begun to tremble. Who was a barbarian, and who got to decide? To Rome, a barbarian was anyone who didn't speak Latin, follow Roman law, or obey its traditions. But by the late empire, the word had lost all meaning. Because many of these so-called barbarians lived within Rome's borders, traded in its markets, and even fought in its armies. Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Franks, Alans. Some were herders, some were warriors, others simply wandering people in search of land. But they all shared one thing. They were born outside Rome, yet looked inside it for a future, borders that were once impenetrable. For centuries, Rome proudly defended its border systems, the limes Romanus along the Rhine and Danube. But in time, these borders became less a wall and more a symbol. Waves of migration increased. Peoples driven westward by the Huns fled toward Roman lands. But this wasn't an invasion. It was an escape. They sought not conquest, but a life, a system, a chance inside Rome. In 376 CE, the Visigoths asked for refuge in the Eastern Roman Empire. And Rome opened the gates. But it wasn't a gesture of compassion. It was an unplanned, unregulated acceptance, followed by exploitation, humiliation, and neglect. Rome enslaved the refugees, starved them, degraded them. And when a people are pushed into desperation, that's when war begins. Adrianople, a Roman catastrophe. The year was 378 CE. Near modern-day Edirne, the Roman army faced the Visigoths. But this was not just another war. Rome was fighting a people it had taken in. And on that day, Rome lost. Emperor Valens died on the battlefield. For the first time in its history, Rome had been defeated in open battle by a people it had once claimed to protect. The enemy was no longer outside, it was within. Rome was now fighting under its own roof. And that internal conflict only accelerated its unraveling. 410, the Visigoths enter Rome. History marks it as a turning point. In 410 CE, King Alaric of the Visigoths entered the city of Rome. But the true tragedy wasn't that Rome was invaded. It was that Rome couldn't defend itself. A city once thought untouchable was looted for 3 straight days. So we must ask, was this really the fault of the barbarians? Or was it the inevitable collapse of a system that had been rotting from within? A system that had lost faith in... Did Rome become barbarian? Or did the barbarians become Roman? Here lies the irony. The so-called barbarians who entered Rome didn't seek its destruction. They wanted to become part of it. The Visigoths adopted Roman law. Many barbarian leaders later became Roman citizens. Some were even granted the title of Roman consul. Rome couldn't swallow the barbarians, but the barbarians digested Rome. This was not an invasion, it was a transformation. Rome opened its gates, but failed to guard its values. Final words. Thoughtful sometimes the enemy doesn't open the door. They say history is written by the victors. But the story of Rome feels like a warning written by the defeated. A civilization does not fall when enemies gather at the gates, but when the gate is opened from within. And when that gate opened, it wasn't just the barbarians who entered. Everything Rome had abandoned entered too. Justice, loyalty, hope. All of it, migrated elsewhere. Religious transformation and Rome's identity crisis. Throughout history, what holds a great civilization together isn't just sword or silver, it's belief. People must believe in something shared, a value, a truth, a reason to stand side by side. For centuries, Rome believed in its gods, its rituals, its ceremonies. The same prayers rose from every temple. The same sacrifices were made before every war. But then, those voices fell silent. The gods faded into silence, and as Rome drifted from the foundations of its faith, it began to drift away from itself. An identity built with the gods. From the earliest days of Rome, belief sat at the center of daily life. The state had its gods. Every victory was celebrated with thanks to them. Every disaster was explained as their wrath. Jupiter stood for justice, Mars for war. Vesta guarded the sanctity of the home. Every house had a hearth, every street an altar. Religion wasn't just spiritual. It was the foundation of government, the mortar of society. And that mortar had begun to crack. A new faith enters Rome, Christianity. At first, it was hidden. Small groups gathering in underground tombs, in catacombs. They believed in one God. They had no temples, no altars. And for Rome, that was dangerous. Because showing reverence to the gods wasn't just a tradition. It was a test of loyalty to the state. To disrespect the gods was to betray Rome. That's why Christians were persecuted for centuries, tortured, executed, exiled. And yet, paradoxically, persecution didn't kill the faith. It strengthened it. Even the emperors changed. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, officially recognizing Christianity. It wasn't just a political move. It was a crack in the soul of Rome. Pagan temples were slowly abandoned. Sacrifices to the old gods ceased. Processions, festivals, rituals, forgotten. And that silence opened a void in the Roman spirit. A people once shaped by many gods now bowed before one. With those gods vanished, so too vanished the shared rhythms of life, the sense of collective ritual, the cultural glue that once bound them. A divided people, a fragmented identity. Rome was no longer unified by a common religion. It was torn by religious conflict. Some clung to the old gods, others embraced the new. Still others fought bitterly over how to believe. Christianity didn't bring unity. It brought division. Arians, Orthodox, Donatists. The empire splintered into sects, into suspicion. The Roman people no longer gathered in the same ceremonies, shared the same values, or rallied around the same symbols. This was the deepest kind of crisis, an identity crisis. Empty temples, silent churches. The arena that once held 100,000 spectators was now quiet. Temples, stripped of their gods, stood hollow. Roman architecture still towered over the land, but the spirit inside had vanished. New churches rose, but even within them, the people stood divided. Rome's unity now existed only on maps. The collective identity that once gave it strength had dissolved. And when a society loses its identity, its land is the next to fall. When the gods left, Rome left too. Sometimes history doesn't begin with physical destruction, but with spiritual collapse. When Rome lost its gods, it didn't just lose a religion, it lost itself. The new faith may have been more compassionate, but how that change unfolded revealed not Rome's strength, but its fragility. The problem wasn't the new religion, it was the way the transition was managed. Rome tore down its values, but failed to build new ones. And in that hollow space, Rome spiritually fell. Pastcast, closing words. The gods of Rome died, and the god who replaced them did not bring unity, but silence. And when a society falls silent, history begins to speak. Once upon a time, there was only Rome. One capital, one senate, one emperor. And everyone knew, whether the sun set in the east or rose in the west, it shone under the rule of the same Rome. But in time, that light split. And one morning we awoke to find two hearts beating inside the same civilization. One in the west in Ravenna, one in the east in Constantinople. The beginning, an empire that grew too large. At its peak under Emperor Trajan, Rome stretched so far that it took weeks for a message to travel from one end to the other. A legionary in northern Britain and a tax official in Egypt may have served the same emperor, but they no longer lived in the same world. Governing had become difficult, control was slipping, and so in 285 CE, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into two separate administrative units, east and west. It was presented as a temporary solution, but every temporary solution whispers a permanent fate. Two powers, two economies. The Eastern Roman Empire, modern-day Anatolia, Syria, Egypt, and Greece, held thriving trade routes, ancient cities, and deep cultural roots. The West, Italy, Gaul, Spain, and Britain, was more rural, and over time it fell into the economic shadow of the East. While the East minted gold coins, the West's currency lost its value. The East fortified its walls, while the West abandoned its cities. The East grew stronger, while the West, began to bleed out. A new capital, Constantinople. In 330 CE, Emperor Constantine took a small Greek town called Byzantium and transformed it into a new capital, Constantinople, the new Rome. It quickly became the heart of the East. With its strategic location, mighty walls, bustling harbors, and spiritual air, it wasn't just a military base, it was a cultural capital. Rome now breathed not just in Italy, but also by the Bosphorus. Yet this new center quietly stole the light from the old. Religious differences become political divisions. As Christianity spread, it deepened the growing divide. The East embraced a more philosophical, mystical approach. The West leaned toward dogma and central control. Icons, theology, and debate dominated the East. Papal authority and institutional power ruled in the West, and what began as a religious difference soon split crowns as well as churches. They still shared the same faith, but no longer the same vision. Rome had two faces now, and those faces had begun to turn their backs on each other. CE. Only the affection of warms of a pleasing this taking, $1,000 which takes continent to the danger, against the affection of light and wonder, a feeling in positive descriptions that worked in more than affection, only of the U.S. through 125 seconds. The affection of light achieved crosses to the U.S. Great 2, porting right in Austria plays. Fly cause of 379 seconds, fueling the last to a several line. A comfortable on soft. The strakes in the year action. After Emperor Theodosius I died, his empire was divided between his two sons, Arcadius in the east,
Arcadius, Arcadius,
Honorius in the west. Two courts, two armies, two states. Yet many Romans still believed they would reunite someday, because Rome was an idea, not just a place. But even the strongest ideas, when left alone, fade into dust. In 410 CE, when the Visigoths sacked Rome, the East did nothing. In 455, when the Vandals came, the East remained silent. And in 476, when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed, the East watched. Because by then, the Eastern Empire, now beginning to be called Byzantium, was already walking its own path. It was no longer Rome. It was becoming Istanbul. Division doesn't just happen on maps. An empire can be split on a map, but the real division happens in the mind. When people no longer believe they share the same flag, the same fate, then the empire is already broken. Rome was a body, but inside it, two souls began walking in different directions. And a body cannot hold two souls. If it does, either one dies, or both slowly fade. Closing message. Rome was divided in two, but here's the real question. Was the division a solution, or a signal of the end? Perhaps, in trying to save itself, Rome split its own heart. And like any heart torn in two, it slowly forgot how to beat.